All right. So I'm going to talk to you today about another adaptation of the MI Diaries application. And this is for a project that we are calling Digital Diaries. This is a project that I am running with a colleague. Her name is Sharon Avni. She's professor of linguistics at CUNY. And it's part of a broader study on learning about religion and particularly about Judaism through the cultural arts. So we're interested in the various ways that people learn about religious traditions through participating in cultural activities like visiting museums, watching movies, and listening to music. Now, our original idea for this project was pretty conventional ethnographic field work. We're both trained in ethnography, and we imagined we would be visiting museums and going to film festivals and art workshops. So obviously COVID put a huge wrench in our plans. We simply couldn't go to any of those places and our research essentially stopped. Then a few months into the pandemic, I attended a session where Betsy and Suzanne presented their work on developing the MI Diaries app. And it got me thinking about how we might use that app in our work. Because we had noticed that although people might not be going to concerts and art shows, during lockdown, they were watching a lot of television, and they were more willing to take risks on television shows that expanded their cultural palettes. And that goes some way to explaining the enormous interest in Shtisel, which was a somewhat unlikely Netflix success story about a family of Haredi, ultra-Orthodox Jews, living in Jerusalem in a neighborhood called Geula. Now, the first two series of Shtisel came to Netflix in 2018, but its popularity really surged during COVID-19 when people were stuck at home looking for something new to watch. And we were really interested in investigating what people learned when they turned to this very unlikely show from Israel. So it was made and filmed in Israel, and it is the dialogue is in a mixture of Hebrew and Yiddish. And so if you are watching in the US, if you're an English language speaker, you'd have to watch with subtitles. It's not particularly clear when they're switching between English and Hebrew. And of course, this is a community that lives a very insular lifestyle. So it really is a very surprising success. So Netflix announced that it was planning to bring the third series of Shtisel to US Netflix subscribers in April 2021. And this gave us a natural date to launch our app, which we called Shtisel Diary. Now, our app used basically the same infrastructure as the app developed for MI Diaries. And drawing insights from what Betsy and Suzanne had learned from using the app over the past few months, we made just a few small alterations. We gave it a backdrop that would be familiar to viewers of Shtisel. So if you see the image of the app on the screen, that's Jerusalem stone that you see there in the background. And we included the word Shtisel written in Hebrew script. That's at the top of the app. And we also included a set prompt on the home screen. So participants didn't have to toggle between questions sent to them via email and the app interface. Now, our app worked in much the same way as MI Diaries. We asked participants to create audio diaries after watching episodes of the show, and to tell us what they saw and what they noticed and what they thought about it. Viewers used a drop-down menu to tell us which episode they had watched. That was another thing that we built into the app that was new. And when they selected that episode, they hit record. And what we were really hoping for by using the Diary app as a data collection tool was an attempt to capture the living room conversations of viewers as they streamed each new episode. We wanted to get a glimpse into their immediate affective responses to characters and to stories and to plot lines. So what were the things in the show that made them gasp or point something out or reach to their phone to Google something that was unfamiliar? Now, we could have used a survey to do this, or we could have followed up with interviews. But by asking viewers to hit record on an app on their phone immediately as the credits rolled, we hoped to gather more immediate and more unfiltered reactions, and we very much did. So the volume of data that we collected from using the app far surpassed anything we could have imagined when we were engaging in our originally anticipated mode of fieldwork of ethnographic interviews. So in the first week that the new series came to Netflix, we captured over 300 audio diaries from viewers across the world. Now, we currently have 580 diaries from over 200 participants. Now, as a two-person research team, there is no way that we could have interviewed this many people ourselves. So the amount of data was really outstanding. And there was one more enormous advantage to using the app from a data collection perspective. So Russ Werner, who's been mentioned before, and Betsy built auto transcription into the app, which meant that all of the auto diaries were automatically transcribed. So all that we had to do was upload those text files into our coding software and begin coding them, which means drawing out and analyzing their key themes. And this eliminated not only a laborious data management step, but it also saved us a lot of money, because sending things, audio files to transcription services is incredibly expensive. So what did we learn from these diaries? Well, in their diaries, participants talked first and foremost about their love for the show and their affection for its principal characters. So as one diarist who described herself as Catholic told us, quote, "I've been anticipating this season so much because I feel so connected to the characters. It was just so wonderful to see them all again and to see their neighborhood in Jerusalem." And this is an important indication, of course, that through television shows like Shtisel, viewers learn to develop cross-cultural affective connections. They develop empathy with people in other cultural worlds, albeit, of course, in this case, with characters that are the creation of script writers rather than necessarily real people. The diarists also spoke about new things that they had learned. We refer to this as explicit learning. So one diarist, for example, told us they saw on the episode today that Orthodox Jews say a little prayer before they eat or drink anything. That was interesting. And that's true. It's not something that the show calls attention to explicitly, right? But as she sees each character say a blessing, a bracha, before they eat or drink anything, she's noticing from watching their behavior that that is part of the religious world of the community. Other forms of learning came more in the form of observations or suppositions or questions. So our diarists asked a lot of questions. They asked why ultra-Orthodox Jews dressed in characteristic Black and white and modest attire, and why they ate certain foods, and why husbands and wives typically sleep in separate beds. They asked about divisions between different kinds of Jews in Israel, and they wondered also about language, as they noticed that some characters used Yiddish, others Hebrew, and others switched between the two. And when people asked about the languages, it was an indication that they were actually recognizing the languages that they were being spoken, either because they were Jewish and had heritage connections to those two languages, or because they were German speakers. And German speakers recognized Yiddish as being different lexically from when characters were speaking Hebrew, even if they couldn't necessarily identify its precise terminology all of the time. We also noticed participants trying out new vocabulary. And the app was a real advantage here because it encouraged participants to try sounding out new words or using them in a sentence appropriately. So this, of course, is a form of learning in and of itself. So I want to play for you a short snippet from an audio diary that was submitted from a participant in Denmark, and she identified herself as Christian. Now, in this clip, she's talking about what she notices about the interior of the characters' homes and how the layout of their kitchen is designed to accommodate Jewish dietary laws, which are known as kashrut, or more colloquially, keeping kosher. So here's what she says.
I love the kitchen with the two sinks, strict division so that you can eat kosher. Actually, I don't even think kosher takes up a huge part of the series. I don't know if I pronounce it right, kosher.
Another advantage of using the app, rather than, for example, conducting an interview, was that people often entered into a stream of consciousness. So without a direct interlocutor, like an interviewer, they tended to ramble from one topic to the next. So they asked rhetorical questions of themselves. They compared the situations that they saw on the screen to life experiences they may have had, or to communities with which they were more familiar. So I have just one more clip for you, and that's from a participant in the US who identified herself as Hindu. Now, in this clip, she's noticing that the men in the series characteristically smoke and drink alcohol. That's two things that they actually do quite a lot. Now, for context, there's no prohibition on those things in Judaism. And this was very confusing to this diarist, because in other religious communities with which she was more familiar, those things are prohibited. And so it was very confusing for her to notice this community, which in many ways is very, very restrictive, engaging extensively in two activities that she thinks of as religiously prohibited. So let's listen to that clip.
One big thing that I've noticed was there's a lot of drinking alcohol and smoking. I mean, not just in this episode, it's been, since the beginning, but it was this episode where we saw Kiva getting drunk at the restaurant. And it just it was just so flagrant. And it got me thinking whether, these practices are allowed in the religion, in the Jewish religion. For example, in Islam, there's an actual prohibition on drinking and smoking. In Hinduism, for example, there's perhaps no formal prohibition, but the most practicing or devout of Hindus would never be drinking and smoking like that. So it's kind of weird to see. If they were just ordinary Jews, that's one thing, but the fact that there were ultra Orthodox Jews, it was strange, put it that way.
So in this clip, when she calls that strange, of course, that's only strange because of the context that she's bringing to the show, which is one in which in religious circles, these things are prohibited, whereas in the context of Judaism, there's really no prohibition at all. So to conclude, what have we learned from all of this and from our experiment with the audio diary infrastructure? So we're still collecting data and we are coding and analyzing hundreds of diaries. But what we've learned from using the app thus far is that when viewers watch a show like Stiesel, they're having very rich and also very nuanced educational experiences. We had no anticipation of deploying digital fieldwork tools and methodologies to research television as a vehicle for religious and cultural education during 2020. And we had definitely never anticipated creating an app for collecting audio diaries. But it's fair to say that the richness of the data that we've been able to collect from the Stiesel Diary app has made us both much more confident into dipping our toes into the waters of digital humanities. So I'll stop there. Thank you.